I was the kid nobody noticed, the one who sat in the back, kept quiet, and prayed the teacher wouldn't call on me. Skinny arms, second-hand clothes that never quite fit, shoes with soles so worn I could feel every crack in the sidewalk. That was me, and honestly I was fine being invisible, until the day I wasn't. Before I continue, if stories like this inspire you, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss the next ones. My name is Danny, and I was 12 years old when everything changed. 12 years old and barely 90 pounds soaking wet. Kids at Lincoln Middle School had names for me. Toothpick, Scrawny, the Walking Skeleton. I heard them all. I pretended I didn't, but I did. Every single one landed like a punch I was too weak to block. It was March and the school was buzzing about the annual Student Council Assembly. Every year they picked one student to speak at the big meeting where parents, teachers, and even the school board showed up. It was supposed to be an honor, a chance to represent the student body, talk about what mattered to us, suggest changes, make our voices heard. But everyone knew how it really worked. They picked the popular kids, the athletes, the ones with perfect teeth and parents who donated to the PTA, not kids like me. I lived with my mom in a one-bedroom apartment on the east side of town. She worked 2 jobs, one cleaning offices at night, the other serving breakfast at a diner that opened at 5 in the morning. I rarely saw her awake. Most days I'd come home to find her passed out on the couch, still in her work uniform, too exhausted to even make it to bed. I learned to cook eggs when I was 8, learned to do laundry when I was 9. By 12, I was pretty much raising myself. School was my escape in a weird way, not because I loved it, but because it was somewhere to be, somewhere warm, somewhere with food, even if it was just the free lunch I qualified for. I wasn't a great student, but I wasn't terrible either. I did my work, stayed quiet, tried not to cause problems. That was my strategy. Be invisible. Don't make waves. Survive. But then Mr. Patterson changed everything. He was my English teacher, this tall guy with graying hair and glasses that were always sliding down his nose. He saw things other teachers didn't. Or maybe he just cared more. One day, he asked me to stay after class. My stomach dropped. I thought I was in trouble. Instead, he handed me a piece of paper. It was the application for the student council speech. I stared at it like he'd just handed me a live grenade. Mr. Patterson sat on the edge of his desk, arms crossed, looking at me with this expression I couldn't quite read. He said, "Danny, I think you should apply for this." I almost laughed. I said, "Mr. Patterson, nobody's going to pick me." He tilted his head. "Why not?" I didn't even know where to start. "Because I'm not popular. Because I'm not smart enough. Because I'm nobody." He let me finish, then he said something I'll never forget. He said, "Danny, you're not nobody. You're somebody who sees things the rest of them miss. That matters." I took the application home, not because I believed him, but because I didn't want to hurt his feelings. I figured I'd fill it out, turn it in, and nothing would happen. I'd go back to being invisible, and that would be that. The application asked for an essay, 500 words about what you'd say if given the chance to speak to the school board. I sat at our tiny kitchen table with a pencil I'd sharpened down to almost nothing and stared at the blank page for an hour. What did I have to say? What did a kid like me know that mattered to anyone? Then I started writing. I wrote about what it felt like to be hungry. Not the kind of hungry where you're waiting for dinner, but the kind where your stomach cramps and you can't focus in class because all you can think about is food. I wrote about the kids who got free lunch and how some teachers looked at us differently, like we were less than. I wrote about the bathroom on the 2nd floor that never had soap or paper towels, and how the guidance counselor's office was only open twice a week, and how some of us needed help more often than that. I wrote about feeling invisible, and how maybe that was the biggest problem of all. Not the broken things we could see, but the broken kids nobody bothered to look at. I didn't think it was good. I thought it was probably too honest, too raw, too much. But it was true, and maybe that's what Mr. Patterson meant. I turned it in the next day and tried to forget about it. 2 weeks later, they announced the winner during morning announcements. I was sitting in homeroom half asleep when I heard my name, Danny Morrison. I looked up confused. Kids around me were staring. The teacher looked surprised. Even I was surprised. For a second, I thought it was a joke, some kind of prank. But then Mr. Patterson caught my eye from the hallway and gave me this small nod, and I realized it was real. I'd won. The assembly was scheduled for the following Friday. I had 1 week to prepare. 1 week to figure out what I was going to say in front of hundreds of people. 1 week to not panic and back out. Mr. Patterson helped me. We met after school every day that week. He didn't write my speech for me, but he asked questions that helped me figure out what I wanted to say. He reminded me why I'd written what I wrote. He told me to speak from the heart, to tell the truth, to not worry about sounding perfect. He said, "Danny, they need to hear your voice, not some polished version. Yours." The night before the assembly, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining all the ways it could go wrong. I'd freeze up. I'd forget my words. I'd sound stupid. People would laugh. The school board would sit there with blank faces, unimpressed, wondering why they'd wasted their time on a kid like me. My mom noticed I was awake. She came into the living room around 2 in the morning and found me sitting on the couch, staring at my notes. She sat down next to me, still in her diner uniform, smelling like coffee and pancake batter. She asked what was wrong. I told her I didn't think I could do it. She didn't say anything for a minute. Then she put her arm around me and said, "Baby, you've been doing hard things your whole life. This is just one more." She was right. I had been. We both had. This was just one more. Friday came faster than I wanted it to. The assembly was scheduled for 10th period, right after lunch. The entire school would be there. Parents, teachers, the principal, the school board members in their suits and ties sitting in the front row with their notepads and serious faces. And me, skinny, scared, 12-year-old me. I sat backstage in the auditorium, waiting for my turn. My hands were shaking so bad I had to sit on them. I could hear the noise from the crowd, hundreds of voices blending into this low hum that made my stomach twist. The principal went up first and did the usual welcome speech, thanking everyone for coming, talking about school spirit and community involvement. Then he introduced me. Danny Morrison, 7th grade, will now share his thoughts with us today. I stood up. My legs felt like they might give out. I walked out onto that stage, and the lights hit me like a wall. I couldn't see anyone's faces, just shapes, shadows. I stepped up to the microphone, and the auditorium went quiet. I looked down at my notes. My hands were still shaking. I opened my mouth and nothing came out. For a horrible second, I thought I'd forgotten everything. Then I remembered what Mr. Patterson said. Tell the truth. Speak from the heart. I took a breath and started. I said, "My name is Danny. I'm in 7th grade, and I'm here because somebody thought my voice mattered." I paused. I don't come from much. My mom works 2 jobs just so we can keep our apartment. I wear the same 3 shirts every week because that's all I have. I get free lunch at school, and sometimes that's the only meal I eat all day. I know a lot of you probably don't think about kids like me, and that's okay. I get it. It's easy not to see something when it's not right in front of you. I looked up. The auditorium was still silent. I kept going, but I'm here to tell you we exist. Kids like me. We're in your classrooms. We sit in the back. We don't raise our hands much. We don't cause trouble. We just try to make it through the day. And a lot of the time, nobody notices. Nobody asks if we're okay. Nobody sees that we're struggling. My voice cracked a little. I swallowed hard and kept reading. I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for attention. I'm asking you to see us. To notice when a kid comes to school hungry. To care when a kid doesn't have a winter coat. To understand that not everyone has parents who can help with homework, or drive them to activities, or buy them new shoes when the old ones fall apart. Some of us are just trying to survive, and school should be the place where we don't have to do that alone. I could feel my chest getting tight. My eyes were stinging, but I kept going. I wrote down some things I think could help. More funding for free meals, not just lunch, but breakfast too. A clothing closet so kids don't have to wear the same thing every day and get made fun of. More counselors who are actually available when we need them. Teachers who are trained to spot the signs when a kid is struggling at home. Little things. Things that don't cost much but mean everything to kids like me. I looked up again. This time I could see some faces. A woman in the front row was wiping her eyes. A man next to her was leaning forward, listening hard. I saw Mr. Patterson standing against the back wall, arms crossed, smiling. I finished with this. I said, "I don't know if any of this will make a difference. Maybe it won't. Maybe you'll all forget about me the second I walk off this stage. But I hope you don't. I hope you remember that there are kids in this school who need you to care, who need you to see them, who need you to do something, because we can't do it alone. We've been trying, and it's not enough." I stepped back from the microphone. The auditorium was dead silent for what felt like forever. Then somebody started clapping. Then somebody else. Then the whole room. People stood up. Teachers, parents, students, even the school board members in the front row. They were all standing, clapping, some of them crying. I stood there frozen, not sure what to do. I'd never had that many people look at me before, never had that many people listen. It was overwhelming, terrifying, and also kind of amazing. I walked off the stage and Mr. Patterson was there waiting. He didn't say anything, he just put his hand on my shoulder and nodded. That was enough. The rest of the day was a blur. Kids I'd never spoken to came up to me in the hallway telling me they loved my speech. Teachers stopped me to say thank you. One of the school board members found me before I left and told me they'd be discussing my suggestions at their next meeting. She said, "You gave us a lot to think about, Danny." I hope she meant it. That night my mom came home early from her diner shift. She'd heard about the speech. Apparently, one of the parents who worked at the diner had been at the assembly and told her all about it. She cried, not sad crying, the good kind. She hugged me so tight I could barely breathe and said, "I'm so proud of you, baby. So proud." If this story has moved you so far, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, because there are other real and emotional stories you can't miss. But what happened after that speech was something I never expected, something that proved words have power, even when they come from a scrawny 12-year-old kid nobody used to notice. And everything was about to change in ways I couldn't even imagine yet. The Monday after the assembly, I walked into school expecting everything to go back to normal. I thought people would forget, that the applause would fade, that I'd slip back into being invisible like always. But that's not what happened. The first thing I noticed was the stares. Not the usual kind, the ones that said, "There's that poor kid." These were different. Kids were looking at me like they actually saw me. Some smiled. Some nodded. A few even said hi. It was weird. Good weird, but still weird. Then things started changing for real. By Wednesday, the principal called an emergency staff meeting. Mr. Patterson told me about it later. They discussed my speech, every single point I'd made. The school board had already approved emergency funding for expanded meal programs. Breakfast would now be free for any student who needed it. No questions asked. They were setting up a clothing closet in the nurse's office, stocked with donated uniforms, coats, shoes. The guidance office hours were extended. They hired a part-time counselor specifically to help kids dealing with stuff at home. It was happening. The things I'd asked for, the things I thought nobody would care about, they were actually making them real. But here's the thing nobody tells you about speaking up. Once you do it once, people expect you to keep doing it. And that scared me more than the speech itself. A girl named Sarah approached me at lunch that Thursday. She was an 8th grader, popular, always surrounded by friends. I'd never spoken to her before. She sat down across from me at my usual empty table and said, "Danny, what you did was brave. I need to tell you something." She looked around, making sure nobody was listening, then leaned in close. She told me her dad lost his job 6 months ago. Her family was struggling. She'd been skipping meals, telling her friends she was on a diet because she was embarrassed to admit they couldn't afford groceries. She said, "I felt every word you said up there. Thank you for being brave enough to say it." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded. She smiled, squeezed my hand, and walked away. That's when I realized my speech hadn't just been about me. It had been about all of us. All the kids who were hiding, pretending, struggling in silence. More kids started coming forward. A boy named Marcus told me his mom was sick and he'd been taking care of his little sisters by himself. A quiet girl named Emma admitted she'd been wearing the same pair of shoes for 2 years, even though they were 3 sizes too small and hurt her feet every day. A kid named Josh said his parents fought every night, and he couldn't concentrate in class because he was so tired from lying awake listening to them scream. They all had stories, and they all thought they were alone, just like I had. Mr. Patterson pulled me aside one afternoon after class. He said the local news wanted to do a story about the school's new programs and my speech. He said it was my choice, but it could help spread awareness, maybe inspire other schools to make changes too. I told him I'd think about it. That night I asked my mom what she thought. She was folding laundry on the couch, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. She stopped and looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Baby, you already changed this school. If you want to change more, I'm behind you. But don't do it because you think you have to. Do it because you want to. I thought about all those kids who'd come to me, all those stories, all that pain that nobody had been paying attention to. I thought about how alone I'd felt before, how invisible, and I realized I didn't want any other kid to feel that way. I told Mr. Patterson yes. The news crew came to the school the following week. They interviewed me in the library, cameras and bright lights everywhere. The reporter was a woman with kind eyes named Lisa Chen. She asked me why I'd decided to speak up. I told her the truth. I said, because I was tired of being invisible, and I was tired of watching other kids be invisible too. They aired the segment that Friday night. My mom and I watched it together on our old TV, sitting on the couch with microwaved popcorn between us. Seeing myself on screen was surreal. I looked smaller than I felt, but my words sounded stronger than I remembered. When it ended, my mom was crying again. She said, "You're going to change the world, Danny." I laughed and said, "Mom, I'm just a kid." She shook her head. "That's exactly why you can." The segment went viral. Not huge, but enough. Other news stations picked it up. Parents from different districts started calling the school, asking how they could implement similar programs. I got letters from kids in other states telling me their stories, thanking me for speaking up. One letter came from a boy in Oregon who said he'd been thinking about dropping out until he saw my story. He said, "If you can be brave, so can I." That letter broke something open in me. I realized this was bigger than Lincoln Middle School, bigger than me. This was about every kid who'd ever felt small or forgotten or like they didn't matter. And maybe, just maybe, I could help them feel seen. But not everyone was happy about what I'd done. Some parents complained that I'd made the school look bad by talking about poverty and hunger. One dad wrote an angry letter to the principal saying I was exaggerating, that no kid in America was really that poor, that I was just looking for attention. A few teachers whispered that I was being exploited, that Mr. Patterson should never have encouraged me to apply for that speech in the first place. I heard the whispers. Read the comments online when I stupidly Googled my name. Some people called me a liar. Others said I was being used by liberals to push an agenda. A few said I was just a sob story, nothing special. Those words hurt worse than any punch, because at least a punch is honest. These people didn't know me, didn't know my life, but they felt entitled to judge it anyway. Mr. Patterson found me sitting outside the library one day, staring at my phone, reading comments I should have never looked at. He sat down next to me and said, "Danny, you know what the difference is between you and them? You had the courage to stand up and tell the truth. They're hiding behind screens, tearing you down because your truth makes them uncomfortable. Don't let them win." I wanted to believe him, but doubt is a heavy thing. It sits on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. I started wondering if I'd made a mistake, if I should have just stayed quiet, stayed invisible, stayed safe. Then something happened that changed everything again. A woman named Catherine Mills reached out to the school. She was the director of a nonprofit called Voices United, an organization that helped underprivileged kids tell their stories and advocated for policy changes. She'd seen my news segment. She wanted to meet me. We met in the principal's office on a Tuesday afternoon. Catherine was in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and a warm smile that reminded me of my grandmother, back when she was still alive. She shook my hand and said, "Danny, I've been doing this work for 20 years. I've heard a lot of speeches. Yours was one of the most powerful I've ever seen." She told me about Voices United, how they trained young people to become advocates, how they connected kids with lawmakers, helped them testify at state hearings, gave them platforms to share their stories. She said, "Danny, you have a gift. You can make people listen, and I want to help you use that gift to create real change." I looked at my mom, who'd taken time off work to be there. She nodded. I looked at Mr. Patterson, who was standing in the corner with his arms crossed, smiling that same proud smile. Then I looked back at Catherine and said, "What do I have to do?" She said, "Just keep telling the truth." Over the next few months, Catherine became my mentor. She taught me how to write testimony, how to speak to lawmakers without getting nervous, how to turn my personal story into something bigger, something that could influence policy. She connected me with other kids from across the country, kids who'd been through things that made my struggles look small, kids who'd been homeless, kids who'd aged out of foster care, kids who'd survived abuse, kids who'd lost parents to addiction or violence or illness. Their stories humbled me, made me realize how much pain there was in the world, how many kids were fighting battles nobody knew about. But it also gave me hope, because if all of us spoke up, if all of us refused to stay invisible, maybe someone would finally listen. In June, Catherine invited me to testify at a state Senate hearing on child poverty and education funding. I was terrified. This wasn't a school assembly. This was the actual government, people who made real decisions that affected real lives. And they were going to listen to me, a 13-year-old kid who still shopped at thrift stores and sometimes went to bed hungry. My mom couldn't get off work, but Mr. Patterson drove me to the Capitol. The building was massive, all marble in columns and echoing hallways. I felt even smaller than usual walking through those doors. Catherine met us inside. She walked me through what would happen, where I'd sit, how long I'd have to speak. 3 minutes. That's all they gave each witness. 3 minutes to say something that mattered. We sat in the hearing room, waiting for my turn. I watched other people testify. Experts with degrees in statistics, advocates with decades of experience. And then they called my name. I walked up to the microphone, my prepared statement shaking in my hands. The senators sat in a half circle in front of me, elevated, looking down. Some were paying attention, some were on their phones. One looked half asleep. I started reading my statement. My voice was quiet at first, but it got stronger as I went. I told them about my life, about my mom working 2 jobs, about going to school hungry, about feeling invisible. I told them about the changes Lincoln Middle School had made and how much they'd helped kids like me. I told them that thousands of kids across the state were in the same situation and they deserved the same support. Then I put down my statement and said something I hadn't planned. I looked right at the senators and said, I know you have a lot of important things to deal with, budgets and bills and politics, but I'm asking you to remember something. Every decision you make affects real kids. Kids like me. Kids who are counting on you to see them, to care about them, to do something. Please don't let us down. One of the senators, an older woman with silver hair, took off her glasses and wiped her eyes. Another senator leaned forward and said, Thank you, Danny. That was very powerful. We'll take your testimony into serious consideration. I wanted to believe him, but I'd learned that adults say a lot of things they don't mean. So I just nodded, said thank you, and walked back to my seat. Catherine hugged me tight. She whispered, You did great. Mr. Patterson squeezed my shoulder. We left the Capitol, and I tried not to think about whether any of it would actually matter. But here's the thing about speaking truth. Sometimes it works slower than you want. Sometimes you plant seeds and don't see them grow for months or even years. But they do grow, even when you can't see it happening. They grow. That summer changed me in ways I didn't expect. I turned 13 in July. My mom scraped together enough money to buy me a small cake from the grocery store. We ate it together on the couch, just the 2 of us, and it was perfect, simple, real, the kind of moment I'd remember forever. But I wasn't the same kid I'd been a year ago. Something had shifted inside me. I'd found my voice, and now I couldn't imagine going back to being silent. Catherine kept in touch throughout the summer. She'd call every few weeks to check on me, tell me about other kids in the program, share updates about advocacy efforts happening across the country. She told me the state Senate was reviewing education funding proposals that included some of the things I'd testified about. She said it wasn't guaranteed, but there was momentum. There was hope. Hope is a dangerous thing when you've spent most of your life without it. It makes you vulnerable, makes you believe things might actually get better. And when you're a kid like me, believing things can get better feels like setting yourself up for disappointment. But I chose to hope anyway. 8th grade started in September. I walked into Lincoln Middle School that first day and barely recognized it. The changes we'd fought for were everywhere. The breakfast program was in full swing, with kids lining up every morning for free food. The clothing closet was stocked and organized, with a volunteer coordinator who helped kids find what they needed without making them feel ashamed. There were posters in the hallways about the expanded counseling services, about resources for families struggling financially, about how to get help if you needed it. It was everything I'd asked for, everything I'd hoped for, and it was real. But the biggest change was in the kids themselves. More kids were speaking up now, asking for help, sharing their stories. It was like my speech had given them permission to stop pretending everything was okay. And slowly, quietly, the culture of the whole school started shifting. Sarah, the girl who'd first approached me after my speech, started a student support group. It met once a week in Mr. Patterson's classroom after school. Kids could come and talk about whatever they were dealing with. No judgment, no pressure, just a safe space, to be honest. I went to the first meeting, nervous about what it would be like. There were maybe 8 kids there. By October, there were 30. One afternoon in November, Mr. Patterson asked me to stay after class again. I figured he wanted to talk about an assignment or something. Instead, he told me I'd been nominated for the state's Youth Advocate Award. It was given to one student each year who'd made a significant impact in their community. The ceremony was in December. If I won, I'd receive a $5,000 scholarship for college. $5,000. I couldn't even imagine that much money. My mom and I lived paycheck to paycheck. Sometimes not even that. The idea of having money set aside for college felt like a fantasy. I told Mr. Patterson there was no way I'd win. He smiled and said, "Danny, you've already won. This is just people recognizing it." I didn't tell my mom about the nomination at first. I didn't want to get her hopes up. She worked so hard, sacrificed so much, and I knew how much it would mean to her if I won. But I also knew how much it would hurt her if I didn't. But word got around anyway. One of the teachers mentioned it to another parent, who mentioned it to someone at my mom's diner, and eventually it got back to her. She came home that night and found me doing homework at the kitchen table. She stood in the doorway, still in her uniform, and said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I didn't know what to say. I shrugged. She crossed the room and pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. She said, "Baby, I'm proud of you no matter what happens. You know that, right?" I nodded against her shoulder. She pulled back and looked me in the eyes. She said, "But Danny, you need to understand something. You've already changed so many lives, mine included. That's worth more than any award." The ceremony was scheduled for December 15th at the state capitol, the same building where I'd testified 6 months earlier. Catherine offered to drive us. My mom took the day off work, which was a huge deal because she never took days off. She couldn't afford to. But she said, I wouldn't miss this for the world. We drove to the Capitol on a cold Saturday morning. I wore the only nice shirt I owned. A button-up Mr. Patterson had given me that was slightly too big but looked decent when tucked in. My mom wore her nicest dress, the one she saved for job interviews and funerals. She looked beautiful, tired, but beautiful. The ceremony was held in a large auditorium inside the Capitol building. There were maybe 200 people there. Other nominees and their families, state officials, representatives from various non-profit organizations. Catherine sat with us in the 3rd row. Mr. Patterson was there too, sitting a few rows back. When I turned around and saw him, he gave me that same encouraging nod he always did. They announced the other award categories first: environmental leadership, academic excellence, athletic achievement, community service. Each winner walked up to the stage, received their award, and gave a short speech. They were all impressive. Smart kids, accomplished kids, kids who seemed like they had their whole lives figured out. Then they got to the Youth Advocate Award. The presenter was a woman named Jennifer Torres, the State Secretary of Education. She took the microphone and started talking about the importance of young people using their voices to create change. She said, "This year's recipient exemplified that spirit in every possible way. At just 12 years old, he stood in front of his school board and told a truth that many adults were too afraid to speak. His courage sparked a movement that has since spread to schools across our state. His advocacy has directly influenced policy discussions at the highest levels of government, and his story has inspired countless young people to speak up about their own struggles." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. She kept talking, describing the impact, the changes, the ripple effects. Then she said, "This year's Youth Advocate Award goes to Danny Morrison." Everything after that felt like a dream. Walking up to the stage, shaking her hand, holding the plaque, looking out at the audience and seeing my mom crying, seeing Mr. Patterson standing and clapping, seeing Catherine with her hand over her heart. They handed me the microphone for my acceptance speech. I hadn't prepared anything. I figured I wouldn't win, so why bother? But standing there, looking at all those faces, I knew exactly what I wanted to say. I said, "A year ago, I was invisible. I was a kid who nobody noticed, nobody listened to, nobody cared about. At least that's what I thought. But then I learned something important. Being invisible isn't about who you are. It's about who's willing to see you. And once someone sees you, really sees you, everything changes. I paused, looking at my mom. She was sobbing now, not even trying to hide it. I continued, I'm standing here today because people saw me. Mr. Patterson saw me. Catherine Mills saw me. My mom saw me, even when she was exhausted and struggling and barely had time to breathe. They saw me, and they made me believe I mattered, that my voice mattered, that my story mattered, and because of them, I found the courage to speak up. I held up the plaque. I said, this award isn't just mine. It belongs to every kid who's ever felt invisible, every kid who's gone to school hungry, every kid who's worn the same clothes for weeks because that's all they have, every kid who struggled in silence because they thought nobody cared. This is for all of us, and I want you to know if you're one of those kids, I see you, and your voice matters. Don't ever let anyone tell you it doesn't. The room erupted in applause. People stood. My mom was crying so hard she could barely see. Catherine was wiping tears from her eyes. Mr. Patterson was clapping with his hands above his head, this huge smile on his face. I walked off the stage clutching the plaque, trying not to cry myself. My mom grabbed me the second I reached her. She held me so tight I thought my ribs might crack. She whispered in my ear, I love you so much, baby. So much. The $5,000 scholarship was deposited into an account in my name the following week. My mom and I went to the bank together to set it up. She sat across from the banker, signing papers, and I watched her face. She looked lighter somehow, like a weight she'd been carrying for years had finally lifted, even just a little. On the drive home, she said, Danny, this money is for your future, for college. Promise me you'll use it for that. I promised. She smiled and reached over to squeeze my hand. She said, you're gonna do incredible things, baby. I can feel it. Things got better after that. Not perfect. We still struggled. My mom still worked 2 jobs. We still lived in our tiny apartment. But something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't invisible anymore, and neither were the other kids like me. The state Senate passed a new education funding bill in February that included expanded meal programs, increased counseling services, and grants for schools to create their own clothing closets and emergency resource programs. It wasn't everything we'd asked for, but it was something. It was a start. Catherine told me my testimony had been a key factor in building support for the bill. She said, Danny, you changed policy. You actually changed policy. Do you understand how rare that is, especially for someone your age? I didn't fully understand. I just knew that kids in other schools across the state would have access to the things I'd fought for, and that mattered more than any award or recognition ever could. But with visibility came new challenges. Some kids at school started treating me differently. Not badly, but differently. Like I was somehow special now. Like I wasn't one of them anymore. A few kids accused me of acting like I was better than everyone else, which stung because that was the last thing I wanted. I was still the same Danny, still poor, still struggling, still just trying to make it through. One day, a boy named Tyler cornered me in the hallway. He was bigger than me, older, and had a reputation for being mean. He got in my face and said, you think you're some kind of hero now? Think you're better than the rest of us? I shook my head. I said, no, I don't think that at all. He shoved me against the locker. He said, then stop acting like it. I didn't fight back. I just stood there, waiting for him to do whatever he was going to do. But then Sarah appeared out of nowhere. She stepped between us and said, Tyler, back off. He laughed. He said, or what? She didn't flinch. She said, or you'll prove you're exactly the kind of person Danny was talking about. The kind who tears people down instead of lifting them up. Tyler stared at her for a long moment. Then he backed off, muttering something under his breath, and walked away. Sarah turned to me and said, you okay? I nodded, even though my hands were shaking. She said, don't let people like him get to you. What you did matters, don't forget that. I didn't forget. But I did learn that speaking truth comes with a cost. Some people will love you for it. Others will hate you. And you have to be okay with both. By the time I finished 8th grade, I'd given 3 more testimonies at various state hearings. I'd been interviewed by multiple news outlets. I'd spoken at 2 other schools about advocacy and finding your voice. And I'd helped Catherine's organization connect with dozens of other kids who had their own stories to tell. But the thing I was most proud of wasn't any of that. It was the student support group Sarah had started. It was still meeting every week in Mr. Patterson's classroom, and it had grown to over 50 regular members. Kids were showing up, sharing their struggles, supporting each other, creating a community where nobody had to be invisible. That was the real change. Not the policies or the awards or the recognition. It was kids seeing other kids, kids helping other kids, kids refusing to let each other suffer in silence. On the last day of 8th grade, Mr. Patterson pulled me aside one final time. He handed me a letter. He said, "Don't open this until you get home." I took it, confused, and stuffed it in my backpack. That night after my mom went to bed, I opened it. It was handwritten, in Mr. Patterson's messy scrawl. It said, "Danny, I've been teaching for 23 years. I've had thousands of students walk through my classroom, but I've never had a student quite like you. You reminded me why I became a teacher in the first place. You reminded me that one voice, one story, one act of courage can change everything. Thank you for that. Thank you for being brave enough to speak up when it would have been easier to stay quiet. Thank you for showing other kids that their voices matter too. I'm proud of you, and I'm excited to see what you do next. Keep speaking truth. The world needs it. Mr. P." I read that letter 3 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it in the box under my bed where I kept important things. My award certificate, articles about my advocacy work, pictures of my mom, and now this letter, proof that I'd mattered, that I'd made a difference, that I wasn't invisible anymore. If this story has touched you, subscribe to the channel and comment below which part moved you the most. And before you go, there's a recommended video right here that will give you chills. Watch it now. High school started that fall. Lincoln High was bigger, scarier, full of kids I didn't know. But I wasn't afraid the way I'd been before, because I knew something now that I hadn't known back in 7th grade. I knew my voice had power. I knew speaking up could change things, and I knew I wasn't alone. Have you ever judged someone and later discovered you were wrong? What lesson did you learn from this story? Comment below. I want to hear from you.